Welcome to Karen Universe, where we dive into every wild, quirky, and intriguing story out there. When the HOA president parked on Karen's lawn, once she asked him to stop. He did not. She asked a second time, still no change. But the third time he parked, she took a revenge you won't believe. Now watch what happened that shocked the entire neighborhood.
It all started on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning where the sun hits your porch just right, birds are chirping, and the world feels calm. But then I stepped outside, and froze. There it was again. The bright, obnoxious SUV of the HOA president parked smack in the middle of my freshly mowed lawn. Not just once, not just twice, but every single weekend. Tires sinking slightly into the grass, leaving muddy tracks, crushing flowers I had spent hours planting. And right then, I felt it, the exact kind of frustration that boils under your skin, the kind that whispers, enough is enough. You have to understand, this wasn't just about grass or flowers. This was about principle. About boundaries. About respect. And apparently, respect was something the HOA president had never heard of. I thought about the countless polite notes I had left, the friendly "please don't park here" messages, even the passive-aggressive smile when I saw him backing in for the third time that week. Nothing worked. He treated my lawn like his personal parking lot, and with every tire mark, my patience wore thinner. By noon, I was pacing. I tried reasoning with myself, maybe it's not worth it, maybe I should just let it slide. But then I noticed something on the driveway, a small can of expanding foam I had bought for a home repair. And for the first time, an idea started forming in my mind. Just one can. One little can, and a lesson that no one could ignore. The more I thought about it, the more vivid it became. I imagined him arriving next weekend, smug and entitled, only to meet a surprising, messy barrier right where he thought he owned space. The thought made me grin, and it wasn't a polite grin. It was the grin of someone who had just found a way to fight back without calling the cops, without involving the HOA committee, without a single person knowing except me. I could already feel my heartbeat quicken. The adrenaline. The anticipation. The thrill of finally flipping the script in a story where I had always been the frustrated neighbor. But, of course, pulling this off required precision, timing, and nerves of steel. One wrong move, and it wouldn't just be a funny story, I'd be in serious trouble. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about revenge. This was about sending a message. A bold, unforgettable, absolutely sticky message. Smiling face with horns fire. Do you want me to continue to chapter 2, where I set the trap and prepare the foam for the perfect lawn showdown? The week after my boiling realization, I became almost obsessive. I walked past the lawn multiple times a day, imagining exactly how he'd park, the trajectory of his tires, and the precise spot where one small can of expanding foam could deliver maximum chaos. It sounds crazy, I know, but when you've been disrespected for months, plotting revenge starts to feel like an art form. I needed intel. I watched from the blinds as he circled the neighborhood, honking at neighbors, sipping his morning coffee, and laughing like the world owed him a free parking spot. Every detail mattered. Which tire would hit first? Would he park straight or at a slight angle? And most importantly, where was the weak point of my lawn that would give the foam its full effect? By Thursday, I had my plan sketched out on a scrap piece of paper. Not a full blueprint, just a crude diagram of my driveway and the lawn's softest spots. I had even calculated the angle at which the SUV would approach. It was meticulous, borderline obsessive, but it had to be perfect. One can of foam could make the difference between a harmless prank and a complete disaster, or worse, A failed attempt that would backfire on me. I also had to consider the timing. He always arrived around 8:15 a.m. on Sunday. Too early, and neighbors might see me sneaking around with the can. Too late, and the foam might dry before he even stepped out. Precision was key. I even practiced deploying the can in my mind, visualizing the hiss of the expanding foam, the way it would slowly rise and harden into a barricade, and the look on his face when he realized he couldn't move without trouble. Then came the mental preparation. I knew revenge can feel sweet in theory but messy in practice. I rehearsed my reactions, the calm exterior I'd maintain while secretly laughing inside. I imagined him pounding the steering wheel, cursing, realizing that for once, the rules had changed. It was exhilarating just thinking about it. I stocked the foam, tested it in a small corner of my garage, and made sure the nozzle worked perfectly. I was obsessed with making this foolproof. One mistake, one drip in the wrong place, and all my planning would unravel. Sunday morning arrived. The sky was clear, the air crisp. Every neighbor was still asleep, or so I thought. I crouched behind a bush, foam in hand, heart pounding like a drum. The first sound of the SUV rounding the corner sent adrenaline surging through my veins. It was happening. My plan was in motion. The SUV slowed as it reached my driveway, exactly like it always did, tires crunching softly against the gravel. I held my breath, crouched low, hidden just enough to see without being seen. The engine idled for a second, as if the universe itself was pausing, giving me one last chance to back out. I didn't. The front tires rolled onto my lawn, pressing down the grass like it had done so many times before. That was my cue. I twisted the nozzle and pressed. The foam burst out with a sharp hiss, thick and fast, pouring into the shallow trench I'd prepared earlier. It expanded instantly, swelling like it was alive, filling space far quicker than I'd expected. I felt a flash of panic, but there was no stopping it now. I pulled back just as the driver's door opened. The HOA president stepped out, smug as ever, phone in hand, not even bothering to look down. He took one step and stopped. His shoe sank slightly into something that definitely wasn't grass. He frowned, lifted his foot, and stared. The foam was already rising, creeping outward, locking itself around the tire and spreading across the lawn in pale, ugly waves. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice sharp with confusion. He bent down, poking at it with a finger. "Big mistake." The foam clung instantly, stretching and sticking, refusing to let go. He shook his hand, cursed louder, and stumbled back. I bit my lip so hard it hurt, forcing myself not to laugh. This wasn't the explosion I'd imagined. It was slower, worse. A creeping realization dawning on his face that something was very, very wrong. He rushed back to the SUV and tried the door. It opened, but when he turned the key, the engine revved uselessly. The tire didn't budge. The foam had hardened enough to grip it in place, anchoring the vehicle to my lawn like a concrete anchor. He got out again, pacing now, anger replacing confusion. That's when he looked around. Really looked. His eyes scanned the houses, the driveway, the lawn, and for a split second, I thought he saw me. My heart slammed into my ribs. But then a curtain twitched across the street. A neighbor was watching. The HOA president straightened up, face flushing red. He pulled out his phone, stabbing at the screen, probably calling anyone to explain why his authority was currently trapped in a patch of expanding foam. And standing there, hidden and shaking, I realized something terrifying and thrilling at the same time. This was no longer a prank. This was a full-blown neighborhood incident. By the time he finally gave up trying to free the SUV, the neighborhood was stirring. Windows cracked open, curious faces peeking out, phones in hand, capturing every second. I stayed crouched behind the hedge, heart pounding, as my simple act of revenge started a full-blown spectacle. The HOA president stomped around the lawn like a man possessed. Foam clung to his shoes, brushing against his pants, and every attempt to scrape it off only made it stick worse. He cursed under his breath, muttering words that sounded almost biblical in their intensity. This is impossible," he yelled, waving his arms as if the lawn itself had personally insulted him. Across the street, Mrs. Jenkins opened her window. "Is he stuck?" she asked, squinting. A few more neighbors stepped out, shaking their heads, whispering, and pointing. Phones lifted, recording the meltdown. By now, I could hear faint laughter from Mr. Patel 2 houses down. The scene had transformed from petty revenge to full-on neighborhood theater. The president tried calling for backup. He dialed numbers furiously, but apparently, no one wanted to deal with this mess before their morning coffee. He ran to the mailbox, yanked out letters, and waved them in the air, muttering about bylaws and regulations, as if that would magically free his SUV. The foam didn't care. It was patient, creeping into every crevice, solidifying like a monument to my irritation. Meanwhile, the crowd outside grew bolder. A couple of kids pointed and giggled. A neighbor stepped onto the sidewalk and shouted, "Need some help there?" The president spun toward them, eyes wide with panic and rage. But the message was clear: he was no longer in control. The people who usually nodded at his HOA rules were now watching him fail spectacularly, his authority evaporating under the weight of sticky, expanding revenge. And me? I stayed hidden, my chest heaving, trying not to laugh so loudly that I gave myself away. Every second that passed, the foam hardened further, locking the SUV in place, while the president's frustration grew more and more absurd. I had imagined this moment hundreds of times, but seeing it unfold in real life, watching him stomp, scream, and realize that I had outsmarted him with one can of foam was better than I had ever dared hope. By the time he finally gave up and slumped against the hood, defeated and sticky, the neighborhood had fully awakened. Whispers of "Did you see what he did, and he's stuck," spread like wildfire. For the first time in months, I felt vindicated. The balance of power had shifted. By late morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Phones flashed in every direction, cameras capturing the sticky chaos as the HOA president leaned helplessly against his immobilized SUV. From my hiding spot, I watched the slow parade of spectators, neighbors who had once waved politely now openly snickering at the spectacle. Every step he took seemed heavier, every movement more desperate. The president's face had turned a shade of red I didn't know existed. Sweat dripped down his temple as he waved his arms, muttering under his breath. I could practically hear the gears turning in his mind. This isn't over. I will get revenge. I am the HOA president. I have authority. Authority, however, didn't seem to help when a thick layer of expanding foam clung stubbornly to tires, doors, and sidewalks. Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor with a penchant for drama, leaned over her porch railing. "Well, Mr. Thompson," she called out, voice dripping with sarcasm, "looks like someone finally took a stand." A ripple of laughter spread among the small crowd forming along the street. The president glared, but his glare lacked teeth. It was defeated, almost comical. By now, I had retreated to the safety of my porch, observing the unfolding spectacle with quiet satisfaction. He made frantic phone calls, waved his arms at imaginary reinforcements, and even tried to dig around the foam with a garden trowel. Every attempt made the situation worse. Foam clung to the shovel, stuck to his gloves, and in some places, had hardened so completely it threatened to cement his SUV to the lawn for days. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about pride, ego, and stubbornness. And he had neither the tools nor the strategy to regain control. Neighbors whispered, some cheering silently for the underdog, the one who had finally stood up to the overbearing HOA rules. I grinned behind my curtains, heart racing, Realizing the satisfaction of watching him fumble was a pleasure unlike any other. But while the crowd enjoyed the spectacle, I knew the president wouldn't simply walk away. The day was far from over. He would plot, he would strategize, and he would probably return with reinforcements. I had ignited a spark, and sparks often turn into fires. One can of foam had shifted the entire dynamic. As I sipped my coffee, I realized I was witnessing the beginning of a long, absurd war. And in the back of my mind, a dark little thought settled comfortably: I'm ready for whatever he throws next. By the next morning, the foam-covered SUV was gone, but the damage it left behind lingered like a warning sign. Tire marks scarred my lawn, chunks of hardened foam clung stubbornly to the grass, and the memory of yesterday's humiliation hung thick in the air. I knew one thing for sure: the HOA president wasn't done. Men like him never were. Right on schedule, the first notice appeared on my door. Bright white paper. Bold letters. HOA violation, unauthorized lawn alteration. I laughed out loud. Unauthorized. After months of him parking wherever he pleased, this was what he chose to enforce. The notice listed fines, inspections, and a mandatory hearing. It was clear, this was personal. Over the next few hours, more followed. Noise complaints. Property damage allegations. Even a warning about hostile landscaping. Each notice felt like a petty slap, but together they formed a threat. He was using the rulebook like a weapon, trying to bury me under paperwork and penalties. And for the first time since this started, I felt a flicker of doubt. Had I gone too far? Neighbors noticed too. A few stopped by under the pretense of borrowing sugar or checking mail. They whispered updates, shared screenshots of the HOA group chat, and told me the president was furious, ranting about setting an example and restoring order. Apparently, I was now public enemy number one. The irony almost made me choke with laughter. That afternoon, he finally showed up in person. Not alone. 2 HOA board members stood behind him, arms crossed, faces stiff. He didn't shout this time. He smiled. A tight, controlled smile that made my stomach knot. "We'll be reviewing your property very closely," he said calmly. "Rules are rules." I nodded, pretending to listen, but inside my mind was racing. I realized something important in that moment: he expected me to fold. To apologize. To be scared. He thought authority alone would win. But what he didn't know was that I had receipts. Photos. Messages. Months of evidence of his SUV on my lawn. As they walked away, I felt the fear drain out, replaced by resolve. This wasn't just retaliation, it was a challenge. And I had no intention of losing. If he wanted to escalate through the HOA, I'd meet him on that battlefield, armed with proof and patience. Because the truth was simple. He had started this war. And I was done backing down. The HOA hearing was scheduled for Thursday evening, a grim little room with fluorescent lights and stiff chairs. The air smelled of coffee, paper, and tension. I arrived early, files in hand, a quiet confidence settling in. Today, I wasn't the frustrated neighbor. I was prepared, armed with months of documentation, timestamps, and photos. The HOA president entered first, radiating smug authority. His eyes scanned the room, landing on me with a look that was equal parts fury and disbelief. He thought he had me cornered, caught in a mess of his own making. I took my seat calmly, letting the anticipation build, as the board called the meeting to order. He spoke first, reciting complaints and alleged violations. The can of foam, he said, was hazardous, malicious, and disruptive to neighborhood peace. His words dripped with righteous indignation, as if the laws of the universe supported his parking habits and punished those who dared challenge him. The board nodded solemnly, taking notes as if the script had already been written. Then it was my turn. I set my files on the table, photographs spilling across the surface, messages printed in bold, and video screenshots showing the SUV parked repeatedly on my lawn. I explained the timeline, the repeated polite requests, and the complete disregard for my property. I spoke clearly, deliberately, letting each fact land like a hammer strike. The room went silent. The board shuffled papers, whispering among themselves. The president's smug expression faltered. I could see panic flicker in his eyes, like a candle in the wind. Every violation he had tried to pin on me was now reversed. The evidence was irrefutable. He had been the intruder, the rule breaker, and now, everyone could see it. I leaned back, letting the tension hang, and for a moment, I imagined the foam, the stubborn, sticky reminder of his arrogance still locked in place in my mind. It was poetic justice, the perfect visual metaphor for the chaos he had created himself. By the end of the hearing, the board ruled in my favor. Not only were the complaints dismissed, but the president was instructed to apologize formally for the repeated trespasses. My lawn was declared off limits, and the threat of fines evaporated. The victory was clean, undeniable, and utterly satisfying. As I walked out, neighbors outside whispered and waved, some giving thumbs up, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The president lingered, defeated, silent, a man humbled by his own actions and my single act of clever, sticky revenge. Just when I thought the war was over, the HOA president proved that some people never quit. Monday morning, a new development awaited me. A notice slipped under my door, bold and threatening, claiming continued harassment and property obstruction. He wasn't done. Far from it. This time, it was personal. I could feel it in the tone of the letter, every word dripping with frustration and thinly veiled revenge. He was escalating. And from past experience, I knew escalation meant one thing: he was about to make a move I couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, I spotted him lurking near the driveway. Not alone this time, he had arrived with a small crew of volunteers, clipboard-wielding neighbors who seemed far too eager to inspect my property. My pulse quickened. He was coming for round two, hoping intimidation would work where rules and hearings had failed. I watched them approach cautiously, but I wasn't afraid. In fact, I was ready. Months of planning, observation, and preparation had brought me to this exact moment. I had anticipated every possible scenario, mapped out every move, and had a little trick up my sleeve that would ensure he didn't leave with his ego intact. As they reached the edge of the lawn, I emerged calmly, coffee in hand, pretending to be completely unfazed. The president's eyes widened when he saw me standing there, a quiet grin tugging at my lips. "I see you're here again," I said softly, letting the tension hang. His face twitched, half disbelief, half rage. He tried to assert control, pointing at the grass, talking about bylaws, neighborly conduct, and threats of fines. I listened, nodding politely, all while subtly maneuvering around the perimeter with a second, smaller can of expanding foam I had hidden in the bushes. Timing was everything. In a matter of seconds, I discreetly applied the foam to the tires of the president's car, not enough to trap it fully, but just enough to create a messy, sticky nuisance. He stepped back, and immediately the chaos began. Foam clung to shoes, splattered on the driveway, and left him struggling in front of his crew, fumbling, muttering, and completely losing his composure. Neighbors who had come to support him now whispered, laughed, and shook their heads. The president's last-ditch effort had completely backfired. The tables had been flipped once more, and the lesson was as clear as it was humiliating: underestimate your neighbor at your own peril. By the end of that chaotic Monday, the HOA president had finally retreated. His last-ditch effort had failed spectacularly, leaving him sticky, flustered, and utterly humiliated. The foam, a silent testament to my cunning, had done its job. And for the first time in months, I could breathe. Word of the showdown spread quickly. Neighbors whispered in driveways, chuckled over fences, and compared notes about the sticky chaos. Some joked that the foam had finally put him in his place, while others shook their heads, still incredulous that a single can of expanding foam had turned the neighborhood into a stage for comedic justice. Children reenacted the scene on scooters, pretending their own tires were trapped, and adults chuckled behind hands, quietly celebrating a small victory for civility. The HOA president, for his part, avoided the neighborhood for a week. Emails went unanswered, phone calls were ignored, and his once confident stride had been replaced by a cautious, humiliated shuffle. When he did appear again, he kept a polite distance, muttering apologies that felt forced, like someone reading lines in a play. It was clear he had learned a lesson, but whether it would last was another story entirely. As for me, life returned to normal, but with a newfound sense of pride. My lawn was no longer just a patch of grass, it had become a symbol of standing up for yourself, of clever strategy over brute authority, and of knowing when to take action in the face of disrespect. I had done it without violence, without legal threats, and without anyone else needing to intervene. One clever plan, and months of frustration had been resolved in a way that was as satisfying as it was unforgettable. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood dynamic shifted. People smiled a little more freely when they saw me outside. Conversations included nods toward that infamous lawn, laughter, and subtle admiration. The president's dominance had been quietly broken, replaced by a community that now understood the limits of authority and the power of creative resistance. Looking back, I couldn't help but grin. What began as a small act of revenge had turned into a neighborhood legend, a story told in whispers and chuckles, and one I knew would be recounted for years. All it took was one can of expanding foam, careful timing, and the willingness to stand up for myself. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes, the most effective revenge isn't loud or aggressive, it's clever, calculated, and impossible to ignore. Smiling face with horns fire.
If you enjoyed the, don't forget to subscribe to Karen Universe, share with your friends and drop your thoughts in the comments.